I'm pretty sure there's actually way more than 50. This is your comprehensive guide to gray. As a color professional, even to this day, my #1 request that I get from clients is, I'm looking for a gray. Like all color trends though, this could easily change in the next couple years or even sooner, but there's still plenty of people that love to incorporate some form of gray into their overall color palette. Truth be told, there is no pure gray. That's why there's way more than 50 shades of it. So I guess that book/movie kind of got it right, because we're briefly going to go through 20-something different grays by Benjamin Moore, but more specifically talk about the different categories of gray and what makes up all of these colors. So in terms of the Benjamin Moore color palette, we can start with 2121-10, and can you guess the name of this color? Yeah, it's called gray. Your opinion of what looks and feels gray may be very different from myself or anyone else watching for that matter, but this is the gray that Benjamin Moore actually recognized as being gray. It's a lot darker than you might think, right? And that's because most people that utilize gray as a wall paint especially tend to opt for lighter shades of gray. Gray is a great alternative to whites, off-whites, and beige walls. And unlike white, gray naturally hides imperfections, whereas white can emphasize those nice little blemishes and scuffs that can definitely become more and more common if you have pets and kids. I still have a couple years before I need to face that reality, so I'm good with my lighter walls. So there was definitely a practical element to the emergence of gray compared to off-white. Gray is still considered a neutral, so it innately goes great with most colors, and it's really a modern twist on the commonly used and abused beige and light tan colors that exist. Gray can act as a neutral backdrop to your collection of furniture and artwork, or conversely become a statement color of the room. A dark charcoal gray, for example, introduces drama, yet still feels kinda elegant. Benjamin Moore's Amherst Gray and Secret is a great place to start for those darker shades of gray that don't really have any strong undertones displayed. Alternatively, an all-gray palette can have a similar effect to a pure white palette, but a palette of exclusively gray colors can also be just as interesting as grays paired with other color hues. A gray palette emanates sophistication and luxury. When you're working with a monochromatic color scheme in general, or shades of gray for example, it's important to layer materials such as using different textures to provide depth, like this fuzzy fleece blanket I have here. So soft. That is a common tactic us designers like to use. When you don't have a ton of different color hues to spice things up, you can add dimension through texture rather than differing colors. So that's an important thing to take note of. Now, I really want to talk about color temperature. The temperature of the gray you ultimately select is influential to the overall atmosphere of the space you're designing. The temperature refers to the coolness or the warmth of the color itself and its impact it can have on a room. And this actually correlates very, very strongly to the direction the room is facing and therefore the amount of natural light the area receives. We've done an entire series on lighting exposures and we did all the north, east, south, west ones and their effect on color temperature. So if you're interested, I'll be sure to leave those videos in the description below if you want to check them out after this one. Although the hue and depth of a gray is important, the temperature of a gray color can have a big impact on how the space feels and the vibe it portrays. For example, if we look at silver satin, OC26, an immensely versatile color that I absolutely love, it conveys an iridescent quality, yet still feels kinda warm. Only kinda, but just warm enough. On the flip side, however, 2121-50, Ice Cube Silver is light and airy as well, but has a much cooler temperature. Just looking at them side by side, the difference is quite clear between the two. Be sure to reflect on the color depth, but also the temperature of your gray to attain that perfect hue for your space. So these are some examples of the lighter or off-white grays, and I just wanted to show you how different of a feel each one can have just based on color temperature alone. Now let's talk about location, location, location. Currently, gray can be used in almost any location within a home. Because gray is regarded as a neutral, it makes for a great color option for throughout an entire home. I like to call this the main color in a lot of cases. Probably heard me say that before. Now, Even though it may be easier to just choose one shade of gray throughout the entire house, I would suggest trying to add other hues to your color palette by implementing more than one color throughout your home. Generally speaking, of course, there may be some exceptions to the rule. It'll just make things appear more complete by adding depth and flow from one room to another. This might go against what popular architecture today embraces, which is the open concept floor plans where everything is just wide open. And one color throughout that kind of space sounds ideal to make it feel larger and more spacious. But on the other hand, you can utilize and leverage your home's natural architectural separations like a bulkhead or even a doorway, and that'll help create an opportunity to use those other shades of gray or those colors. You don't have to force everything, you don't have to feel like you have to do an accent wall on every other wall, but in those spots where it makes sense to change things up, can just complete the look, add that dimension, add that visual variety, and just make for a more interesting look overall. Now, being a member of the paint people, I've tinted a lot of paint back in my day. Tinting paint is comprised of adding small or large amounts of colorant to create a color that you're looking for. And each gray is no different. It's made up of different undertones, and fundamentally, when a gray is tinted, it usually has at least one of those primary undertones in blue, red, and yellow, but also a combination of those three as well. So let's get into the different undertone categories of all the grays out there, starting with blue gray. Everyone tends to gravitate towards what they consider to be the truest gray, but based on my experience, I'd say the majority associate gray with a slightly blue undertone gray. Colors like Coventry gray, Wickham gray, or even silver half dollar are some of the most popular grays for this reason. A blue undertone gray can cool off those south-facing rooms, or similarly, a room with a lot of sun exposure in general. A cool tone gray in a warm room will hold its value and won't look dull or dreary, so that's a good thing. While blue undertone grays may feel like a true gray, there can also be situations like in northern-facing rooms where they can feel cold. And for this reason, I would not recommend a cool blue undertone gray in those types of exposures. It'll just get too overpowering. Blue undertone grays combined with green, however, can draw from the warmer qualities of green and at the same time enhance the silvery crispness of the blue. HC 170 Stonington Gray, for example, appears closer to a true gray, but doesn't really have that purely blue base that you might expect. Other grays such as Gray Owl and Cape May Cobblestone, I believe it's called, they have greenish undertones, and even though it's not a bright undertone like the blue, it does express a softness and a very subtle warmth that differentiates itself. A gray with a red undertone may appear slightly pink at times. However, the lighting with these colors can affect how they present themselves in person. Red undertone grays depicted under daylight or fluorescent lighting can reveal those pink undertones a little more prominently, whereas warm lighting or incandescent bulbs can also play down the pink pigment just enough. Benjamin Moore's Silver Fox and Abalone, those are great examples of grays that possess that warmer red undertone. When a gray possesses an undertone of red, it can also include a purple look sometimes, and a purple undertone is a mixture of blue and red pigment, which is also commonly perceived as a true gray to some people, or maybe even something that's a little bit taupe-leaning or taupey. Love that word. American white is a good example of a purple undertone in a light gray. On the other hand, when you have an ideal ratio of blue to red, a gray can feel really balanced when it doesn't lean too much towards one side or the other. Colors such as Silver Chain and Metro Gray, those are pretty close to a true gray as well, as they both have a red and blue undertone kind of balanced nicely. Finally, we have yellow undertone grays, which will feel and look the most neutral compared to blue undertone grays and even the red ones. Grays with yellow will appear warm and bright, and they're perfect for minimally lit areas. A slight yellow or gold pigment behind a gray is great for spaces without natural light, and it's a good idea to use them in those northern exposed areas for that sense of cohesion and balance. Introducing warm tones of the gray will help it not feel as dreary. These types of colors tend to dance between gray and beige, and it's really worth considering if your house is more of a transitional style. I'll be the first to admit though that yellow warm grays have been overused and they're now fairly commonplace, but that really speaks to how easy they are to implement in a lot of design. Yellow undertone grays are a compromise between the warm elements of beige and the modern, fresh feeling of gray. If you're not wanting to jump into a blue or steely gray, colors like edgecomb gray and baby fawn would be a worthy concession between a cold gray and a warm beige. By the same token, Revere Pewter is also a transitional gray, albeit a bit darker, with that yellow undertone. And while it does have a hint of green in its backdrop, it's currently the most popular Benjamin Moore color still because it's such a flexible and versatile color. Oftentimes, yellow undertone grays are labeled as being grayish, which is a term that is meant to describe a color that combines elements of gray and beige. Hence, you have this made-up word that us designers love to use. Yellow undertone grays can also incorporate a mix of another color, commonly red or orange, much like blue-gray can contain some green at times. Applying red to a yellow gray can create even more warmth and depth, so you have colors like Collingwood, Stonehearth, and Boulevard, which are all great examples of how a combination of yellow and red as undertones of gray work well to establish a warm gray that doesn't show too much like a beige. So if you're really sick of grays, if you add a little bit of red and orange into your color, then you might have something that's a lot more interesting. The hue of the gray you choose will be influenced by the materials that already exist in your space. Reflect on the undertones of your carpets, your floors, maybe your countertops and cabinets when choosing a gray. And by doing so, you can start to eliminate certain grays that just won't work with the undertones you already have to work with. If you're lucky enough to start with a blank slate, it can do the opposite and actually influence the type of materials that you use in your renovation projects. I got an important question for you though. Of the different types of gray we talked about today, which undertone do you gravitate towards most? Cool blue, earthy red, or warm yellow undertone grays? Help me decide which list I should put out first. I got 3 top 10s. We talked about 20 something today. So by the end of all these lists, we'll definitely be at 50 shades of gray. So let me know which one I should do, because teamwork makes the dream work after all. All right, see you later.